we'll start the recording. With that being said, we would like to welcome you to the ALASC Career Development Workshop with Kim Dority, who will be talking about how to prepare for interviews in public and academic librarianship. We are very excited to have her join us this evening. Sorry, okay. Kim Dority is the founder and president of Dority Associates, an information strategy and content development company, focusing on researching and writing print and online content to help her advance client goals. During her career, she has worked in academia, publishing, telecommunications, and the library fields, in for-profit and nonprofit settings. In both for-profit and nonprofit settings, established companies and startups. As the career advisor to the School of Information at San Jose State University, Kim Dority focuses on highlighting the diversity of career opportunities available to iSchool students and sharing strategies necessary to find or create those opportunities. Her responsibilities for the iSchool include expanding the career information available throughout the website's career development section, managing the iSchool's career-focused webcasts and podcasts, overseeing the annual MLIS at Work, a snapshot of job postings report, and working directly with students on career questions or issues. Please give a warm welcome to Kim Dority.
Okay, are you seeing my screen? Hold on. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you, Tani, for that introduction. Some of us know each other already. We have spoken by phone or by Zoom, and I am thrilled to have you on this call with us tonight, especially on a topic that is so important, which is interviewing. And so what we're going to do is first look at interviews in general, and then look at how academic interview situations and public library interview situations differ. As I go along, I am going to be talking about what I know about these kinds of interviews based on my conversations with hiring managers. But that said, one of the really cool things about working with adult students is that you all have information as well, and expertise and experience. So if I say something as we're going along and your experience has been different, or you have something to add to what I'm saying, I would encourage you to please share that through the chat, and then we'll talk about it at the end of the presentation, because I want to ensure that it's not just me saying this is what I know, but it's also all of us saying, okay, and this is what the rest of us know as well. So with that, let's take a look at interviews. And I will start with an affirmation, which is, yes, they do make everybody crazy. There are ways to prepare for them that will make it easier for you. But I wanted to start off with that statement because I want to make sure that everybody knows interviews are difficult for everybody. And everyone who's interviewing you has had to go through the same process. So it's not just you who is having anxiety attacks about this. Okay, so let's go here. First of all, why do people do interviews? What are hiring managers looking for when they bring you in for an interview? It's basically 5 questions that they're trying to answer as they pummel you with questions. The first one is, can you do the job? And the reality is that by the time someone is interviewing you, they already think you can do the job. They think you are close enough to what their requirements or needs are that although they're going to ask you some questions about your domain skills, um, your work related skills, like can you catalog or whatever, pretty much if they're investing their time and energy in interviewing you, they've already sort of answered that question for themselves. So, but that's the first thing. And that's kind of what everybody thinks they're actually supposed to be talking about. But it's these last four things that are really the most important job or most important areas for you. The first one is, do you want a job or do you want my job? Do you want this specific job? Because one of the things that really turns hiring managers off is if they get the sense that the person they're talking to just really, really wants a job that's closer to their house and they have a long commute and they really hate that commute. And so they'll take any library job that is within 10 miles of where they're currently living. If that's what's coming across, you have just lost that job. So part of what they're looking for is to determine whether or not you are someone who wants their specific job, because that's what they're looking for. Another thing they're looking for is what unusual strengths you might bring to the job. This is the tell me about yourself question, where you have an opportunity to essentially tell a narrative about your work history, your job history, or, and that doesn't have to be in the library world. That can be anything that talks about how you conduct yourself, what obstacles you have overcome, what unique strengths you bring to bear. All of those kinds of things can be woven throughout your tell me about yourself narrative. So part of what we're going to talk about is how to handle that in a way that you're not just saying, I was born on a dark and rainy night, but you are talking about the relevant details about yourself that you want to get across. Another thing that they're looking for in an interview situation is, how easily are you rattled? The reason you need to know that is because you also need to know it's okay if you are nervous and anxious, because everybody is in an interview. So you don't need to try to hide that. It's okay if you occasionally stumble over your words, if you say, wait a minute, let me try that one again, and then say what you were trying to say, because being nervous and anxious in an interview situation is the most normal thing in the world. What you want to make clear is, even though I'm nervous, possibly anxious, I can handle this. There's a great statement that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and doing whatever you need to do anyway. Well, it's kind of the same thing here. Yes, it's okay you're nervous. Yes, it's okay that you're anxious in an interview situation. We all are. But you want to make it clear, even if I'm nervous, I can still handle it. I can still back up and start again if I need to. I can take control of my responses, of my reactions, and that's what they're looking for. And then last and most importantly, what would you be like to work with? They're looking at that question as someone who is possibly going to be supervising your work, but also as someone who has a team that they have worked hard to assemble and have a great collaborative, positive energy. They want to see if you are the kind of person who will fit in with that team. That's not a question of any of the DEI stuff. It doesn't make any difference what characteristics you have, as long as your personal energy and your personal attributes mean that you would be able to work effectively and positively with the team that you would be part of. So if these are the questions that interviews are about, let's take a deeper dive into what your answers might look like or how you might prepare to respond to these questions. First question is, can you do the job? Your prep here is to know the job description by heart. You know every word of that job description and you know what it means. You know where it says cataloging special materials, you know what that involves. The easiest way to really get on top of this is to do, if you can, informational interviews with practitioners who have the role that you are applying for. One of the great things about being a student is that you are under the student halo, where almost anybody, if you reach out to them, will be willing to talk to you and give you advice and do an informational interview with you. So if you know that you're going to be applying for a certain type of job, I would, if possible, just reach out to people who are doing that work and ask them questions about their work. What surprises them about the work? What do they think you need to know? What's come up that they didn't expect? Have they had any challenges in their job? What do they think you should know? What should you be prepared to do if you come in as a new professional in that position? Practitioners are a wealth of knowledge and wisdom and advice and lessons learned. And as I say, they're almost always willing to support the success of a student who is coming into the profession. It's one of the things that's very unusual about our profession, and it's one of the things that's so terrific about it as well. So I would encourage you, if you have a chance to, and you know you're going for a certain kind of position, to do informational interviews with the relevant practitioners. The third point is really important because when people put up a job posting, it's usually basically a wish list of, if the most amazing LAS human being walked into our office, these are the skills that they would have for this job. The reality is that probably out of, say, 10 requirements, they're going to be really, really grateful if they can get someone who's got maybe 7, possibly even 6. But the way you want to handle that in an interview situation is to identify and immediately take responsibility for addressing those skills gaps. Because if you say, or you can also do this in your cover letter, by the way, more briefly, but another way to handle this. If you say, I realize I don't have this, and this experience, but here's how I intend to learn that skill or master that information or technology or whatever in the coming 3 to 6 months. That means they know that you will take responsibility for yourself, that you have been honest about saying, I don't know this, and that they can rely on you then and not worry about bringing that up with you or trying to figure out, she doesn't know these 3 things. Should we consider hiring her, even though that's the case? So you always want to identify and address responsibility for your skills gaps. And then lastly, you can ask about their goals for the position. Because if you have prepped for the job that you are going after in terms of what you know about it, the activities, the tasks, the responsibilities, if you ask them about their goals for the position, that's when you may surface, oh, by the way, we'd also like this job to start doing XYZ, or we're considering expanding this job to also cover this. That lets you know that there's another area that you might be able to address in, when you describe yourself and your strengths. You might be able to ask what the success metrics might look like for that. But it's a way to show, not only can I do the job as I, a job applicant, understand it, but I'm also interested to know how you, as my boss or hiring manager, would also qualify the most important priorities for this job. Second question, do you want a job or this job? Preparation, research everything you can find out about the organization. And as you're doing that, find the aspects of that organization that you're most enthusiastic about and be able to discuss it. For example, I would really love to work for this organization because I have followed what you have done in the community with underserved populations. And that's the kind of work that I believe public libraries can really make a difference in. And I would like to be part of helping this library succeed in those goals. And I think that in the work I would be doing as an XYZ, I would be able to do that. You're saying, I value this organization and the strategic goals of this organization, and I want my work to contribute to the success of those goals because my values are in total alignment with this organization. So it's a way of saying, really, I'm not just applying for this job because you're closer to my house and I don't want to commute. Instead, you're saying, I know what's important to this library. I believe in what's important to this library. That's what a hiring manager needs to know, because at that point, you're making a direct connection emotionally and values wise and in terms of what your skills are. Because the cool thing about information skills is that from my perspective, there is no greater resource, no greater change agent for good than the kind of information skills that we all bring to the table. So what you want to do is basically say in an interview situation, I want to use my information skills in a way that aligns with the values of this organization and aligns with the needs of this community. And that's for a public library. In an academic library, it would be the same thing, only you would be focusing on the student community and the things that make that college or university special, and the library within the college and university special. What things does the library do that are unusual for an academic library? What initiatives have they recently undertaken? What new programs have they instituted? The more you can learn about those things and be able to talk about them positively, the more whoever you're speaking to starts seeing you as part of their organization. someone who aligns with and fits into the way they see themselves having an impact in their environment. So when you're preparing for this, be ready to say, I want to do this work, this specific work, this job, because, and I want to do it for this particular library because. Be ready to state what those reasons are for you. All right, next question. What unusual strengths might you bring to the job? And really, unusual is probably an incorrect term there. What I probably should have said is what relevant and useful strengths might you bring to this job that might not have initially jumped off from your resume? So when you're preparing for your interview and you are thinking about how to respond to this question, think about going back to that tell me about yourself question. What you're going to be sort of creating with your answer to tell me about yourself is going to be a narrative that weaves in aspects of your life that might be interesting or relevant or useful to this specific organization and the job you theoretically, hopefully, may end up doing for them. So, the easy ones are I speak 3 languages, or my sister taught me to do American Sign Language, and so I'm fluent in ASL. Or I have had 4 summers spent working at the the Baseball Hall of Fame. And during that time, I was working in their special collections, cataloging XYZ, and developing programs for kiddos to show them how the history of baseball reflects the history of the United States. Those kinds of stories feed into why I love using my information skills, but they may also demonstrate personal attributes that you would like to highlight and bring attention to. For example, I love taking the initiative to come up with new ideas. I love doing outreach. I love working with children. I love doing XYZ, or I have experience doing all of those things. You may have unique knowledge of a specific community within your broader community because you have been part of that community. For example, if you're applying for a job in a community college library and you dropped out of high school and got your GED, and it was a tough slog, and then you ended up loving learning and you went and got your MLIS, that makes you a uniquely valuable person to have as a librarian in a community college, because many of their students are either first generation learners or they have set off in their adult lives and maybe dropped a few balls and now they're starting from scratch and trying to restart in a successful way. You may have the ability to relate to some of those students in a way that no other applicant could. So as you describe your tell me about yourself, these are some of the things that you want to weave into your narrative because they demonstrate unusual characteristics, unusual experiences that may be especially relevant to the job or to the community that that job serves. The important thing to keep in mind here is that you don't need to be a superstar. When I say unusual strengths, I'm not saying you can speak 46 languages and you know 12 different programming languages and you've been a mover and shaker for Library Journal and all those kinds of things. I'm talking here about things, attributes that could be especially helpful in the role you're applying for. Next question, are you easily rattled? So the prep for this is just to assume you are going to be asked really off the wall questions in an interview. And the purpose of those questions is not really to find out what kind of a tree you would be if you were a tree. What they're getting at is how you think about getting to that answer. So the answer is actually less important than your process of going through, how would I come up with an answer to this question? An example of that was that my son was in a job interview recently, and he was sick. This was what they said. So, how would you get a hippopotamus that was stuck in the middle of a creek out of that creek and up the bank and onto the ground? Now, I thought that was the weirdest question I had ever heard. But part of what he was going to be doing was managing people. And so what he did was say, well, it would probably depend on whether the hippo responded better to incentives or disincentives. And then he talked about, if it's incentives, I would try to get someone who knows, what hippos like to eat and sort of put that in front of the hippo and see if we could, get him out that way. And so basically, all he was doing was sort of not taking the question as seriously as how would I think about this? If you can relax and smile and sort of enjoy answering, because at this point these questions are almost a game. It's basically saying we just want to see if we can rattle you with a question that comes out of the blue and you have no way of having prepared for it. By the way, it is always okay at any point in your interview to say, let me think about that. And then think about that and come up with whatever answer comes to you or makes sense to you, knowing that there are no right answers. They're just watching to see what you do. So don't overweight how important it is to seriously think about this and come up with an answer that's meaningful or whatever. Just kind of respond to it as a process of how would you approach this question? Because obviously throughout your career, you're going to get a lot of questions or situations thrown at you that you have no advanced preparation for. And they want to know that you're not going to rattle if that happens. You're going to say, so I've never seen a hippopotamus in the library before. And so how are we going to work this out and get the hippopotamus gone? It's basically just asking you if you can stay calm under unforeseen circumstances. And by the way, I have no doubt that you can. And especially in an interview situation, if you know that's what's going on. The question, what would you be like to work with? This is usually by, you want to prepare for this by practicing answering questions that are probably going to come up, and we'll get to that in a sec. You want to practice asking questions. You want to practice talking about instances of collaboration, team efforts, group successes, student community impact of things that you were involved in. And you want to practice talking about why you're enthusiastic about the work you'd be doing. And here's why these last two pieces are so important. What someone is looking for, a hiring manager is looking for, besides can you do the job, and besides the other questions that we have looked at, is will this person be a good team player? Will this person bring positive energy into the workplace for us? Is this person someone who takes credit and has a big ego, or takes credit for other people's efforts and has a big ego and needs to be the star of the show? Or is this someone who has a lot to contribute, but also is really good about asking questions of other people and listening to the answers and learning from other people's experiences? This is becoming a critical issue, even more so now, because we, in some cases, have 5 generations of individuals working in the same organization. And one of the biggest challenges to that situation is getting people to respect each other's knowledge and experience. And so part of what you want to do coming in, assuming an awful lot of you are going to be way younger than some of the people you're working with, is to make it clear that you can work with anyone from any background of any generation, that you're here to contribute and to learn so you can contribute at an even higher level. If you can get that across, that immediately reassures your hiring manager that you would be terrific to work with. When you practice talking about why you're enthusiastic about the work you'd be doing, it again gives you a chance to sort of reemphasize, I'm here to contribute to the success of my team, my department, and this organization. And that again says, I would be good to work with. That is one of the biggest fears that hiring managers have, is hiring someone who has terrific skills and all sorts of great credentials on their resume. But then when they actually start working, they are disruptive, they are negative, they are resistant. All sorts of things can happen that will have a hiring manager sort of smacking their head and saying, oh, wow, I wish I had been able to suss this out in the interview. So you want to make sure that you are diffusing this head on and making it clear, I'd be a great member of your team. Here is a phrase that I have seen quoted by library hiring managers over and over again. And that is, we can train for skills, but we cannot train for attitude. We need to hire for attitude, because that's the thing that we can't change. That's the thing that comes in hardwired. So you want to make sure as you are preparing for your interview and you are practicing your answers and you are thinking about your responses, that you are framing your approach within the framework of, I have the attitude you need to be incredibly successful in this job and for the organization. And by the way, when I say practicing and preparing, I am taking it for granted that as you guys get ready to start going out on interviews, you're going to be doing a lot of practicing, a lot of role playing, a lot of going back and forth with your fellow students, saying, okay, let's do a meetup online and do mock interviews and go back and forth and helping each other be successful at this, because you can do it by yourself, but it's first of all more fun, and second of all, it's a lot more helpful to have other people doing this kind of practicing with you. So this is how you prepare to answer those questions. All right, now let's take a look at some interview expectations. Some of these come out of questions I've already received from you, and others of these points come out of discussions that I've had with a hiring manager. One of the questions was, should I assume that the first interview is a phone interview? And the answer is absolutely yes. Here's why. The first interview basically is, the assumption is, okay, we know we think you could do this job, so we're going to do a phone interview with you to see if you seem like you might fit in and you would be comfortable doing the job, and you know, you're interested in the job, and you could tell me why you want to work for us and those kinds of things. So assume that that first interview is going to be by phone. Second interview might also be by phone or by Zoom. They're probably actually Zoom. And then if you get a third interview, it's going to be in person, because by the time someone has moved to a third interview, they're usually interviewing no more than 3 people, and they are going to make a decision after that third interview. Sometimes after the second interview, but more usually after the third interview. The thing that I would tell you about doing a phone interview or Zoom interview is practice, practice, practice with your technology. On the day of your interview, do not do, and this is the voice of experience here, do not do anything to your technology that might screw it up. For example, if Windows says, we have a small update that we need to do to your computer, so just close everything down and let us do an update, trust me when I tell you, that update will have totally screwed up your entire computer system. So don't make any changes on the day of your interview to any of your technology. Check it all an hour or 2 before your interview so you know it still works. And if all of a sudden your video cam has stopped functioning, you have time to
I think she got paused.
So right as she's talking about tech stop functioning.
Irony. Irony.
Am I there?
nervous and
Okay, there you go.
anxious.
There you are.
Okay, if you have a tech screw up at the last minute, it will make you nervous and anxious, and then you will not be relaxed and comfortable in your interview. So I would say give yourself at least several hours to do nothing but make sure that your tech is working, that you're familiar with the kinds of things you want to talk about, that you basically are so prepared that you could take a nap, because you don't want anything to go wrong at the last minute that throws off your confidence. The name of the game here is relaxed and confident, or as relaxed and confident as any of us can be in an interview situation. Another point, if you are involved in a panel interview, which means there's probably one main person who's the head hiring person, and then there might be 3 to 5 other people sitting at a table, all looking at you and having no clue who you are. Here's what you should assume happened. The hiring manager made copies of your resume, threw them on the desk of 5 people as they were walking through to interview you, and said, here, you take question number 2, Fred, you take question number 6, Susan, you take question number 5, and then they will be asking you these questions, and you're going to be responding to those questions. Until fairly recently, I assumed that if there was a panel interview, everyone involved on the panel would have read your resume and they would be very knowledgeable about what you brought to the job. And when they asked you that question, that would be because that was their area of expertise. That is not the case at all. So frequently what happens is somebody will ask you a question that may or may not even be in their area of sort of domain knowledge. And they may ask it in a way that makes it clear to you that they have no clue who you are or what your resume looks like. So your job is to assume that is the case and very graciously answer that question as if they had read your resume and they do know about this topic and they do know about you. You can say things like, yeah, I don't know if you saw it on my resume, but I have done this, this, and this. Or, yeah, that was one of the reasons that I thought it was so important to highlight that on my resume, because I think that's really, you've asked a really important question. And here's how that has played out in my professional life or in my experience or whatever. What you want to make sure you don't say is, that's on my resume, or I thought I put that on my resume, or anything like that, because your job in an interview situation is to never ever say something that makes the other side, which I would describe as all those people on the panel, feel like an idiot. And so you instead are going to be gracious and you are going to respond to their question very professionally, very knowledgeably, very thoroughly, and then move on to the next question that will be asked. I think it's a really squirrely way to do panel interviews, but I think it's really important that you're aware of that so that you don't get blindsided when somebody asks you a question and the answer is the first bullet point on your resume. If in an interview you are asked a question and the answer to that question, how would I say this, might cause you to recount a negative situation or an unfortunate outcome or a Looney Tune boss that you couldn't wait to run away from, or any of those things, you want to try to never answer a question with a negative frame. Instead, you want to give a response that is generous to the people involved, Say if you had a problem with your manager, you can say she's a great manager, but we had a different work style. And so we both felt it was probably better for both of us to work in situations that sort of allowed us to contribute at our highest level. You never want to badmouth a previous employer. And I can say that from experience because I've worked for 4 different startups and been laid off from each one because the founders of the startups ran through all the money and they were kind of complete idiots. I would never say that to a potential project lead or client or employer. Instead, I would say we had a great opportunity that we all just worked really, really hard at, but it ended up that we were ahead of the market opportunity. Or if there were a whole bunch of layoffs or your department got laid off, great company, really enjoyed the work we were doing there, but then there was a change in direction, and because of that, our contributions were no longer the central impact that they needed to be, or in some way frame any kind of a negative as a normal thing that happened in life. No hard feelings, excuse me, no bad memories, no burned bridges, that sort of thing. Excuse me. The reason you want to do that is that if you are in an interview situation, well, first of all, it's just good practice. But second of all, if you're in an interview situation, you want to make it clear that you are a professional who is mature enough to rise above petty problems, petty behaviors, petty criticisms, those kinds of things. And because that again gets back to that question of what is this person going to be like to work with? However, I will give you one other reason for always doing this. You will find if you're not already working in an LIS job, the LIS profession is a relatively small one. And consequently, you never know who that hiring manager may know that you were just talking about. That has happened to several people I'm aware of. And so in any situation, you just always want to be your best, most gracious, most professional self. All right, so interview etiquette. These are the sort of 3 biggest questions. The first one is I'm interviewing and then I don't hear anything back. One of the reasons is because people who are hiring managers are frequently so overwhelmed with work responsibilities that they have just assumed, because this is often the case, that if you don't hear back from someone, you'll assume that you didn't get the job. That's a really, really crummy way of handling it, but it does happen. And if it does happen, don't take it personally. Just let go of it. Second thing is, you want to always, always, always follow up an interview with an email. We used to go back and forth between should it be a handwritten note or should it be an email, and most of us are just throwing up our hands and saying, oh, forget the handwritten note, just go ahead and do an email. But what you want to get across in that email is how much you appreciated them taking the time to discuss the job with you. Because that's actually what happened. They did discuss the job with you. They asked you questions, but you asked them questions back. So it was a conversation, it was a discussion. And that secondly reaffirms how interested you are in the job and how happy you would be or enthusiastic you would be to be working with such a great organization. If you haven't heard from anybody for a couple of weeks, it's okay to drop them a line and just say, I'm just checking in to reaffirm my interest in the job, and let me know if there's anything else you need from me or any other questions you need me to answer in order to make your decision. And let it go at that. If you don't hear anything else after that, then assume they've hired someone else. They're too busy or mortified to tell you that they've done that hire. Just let it go and know that that's the way life works when you're applying for jobs. Kind of sucks, but that's reality, and you don't want to waste any energy at all taking it personally or being ticked off about it. Here is what I consider to be one of the most interesting things about interviewing for a job. You're going to be rejected for a lot of jobs. It's just a fact of life. But the cool thing about a rejection is it's actually more of an opportunity than most of us realize. So if you've gotten an email saying, gosh, it was great meeting you, but we've gone with a different candidate, you want to email them back doing these things. First, you're going to thank them for letting you know when you know how busy they are. Second thing, you're going to thank them for, or tell them how much you appreciated the fact that you got to know more about an organization that you were already really impressed by. Then you want to tell them that you're assuming that the person that they went with is going to be a great hire for them, and you wish them all success with their new role. But here comes the important part. Then you're going to let them know that you were so impressed with the organization and the way the hiring interview was, or the way the job interview was conducted, and you so appreciated that you would love to be considered if future jobs open up that are appropriate for all of the wonderful things that they now know you can do. Here's why. Because when you are not hired for a job, whoever didn't hire you for that job is going to feel kind of guilty about that, because if you had a report during the interview, they kind of like you and they're going to feel bad that they had to tell you, no, we're not going to go with you. It is human nature in a situation like that, when someone feels guilty about something, that they're going to assume that you're really unhappy with them because they didn't hire you. And so they will assume that if for any reason there is another job opening, or they hear about a job they could recommend you for at another library, you're going to be so ticked off at them, you won't even want to hear from them. What this rejection letter tells them is, au contraire, you still like them, you're still buddies, and you would love to hear from them. And that's exactly then the mindset that you want them to carry forward about you, because they've already invested in getting to know you. They know what your skills are. If they have another job opening that is in the realm of what you guys talked about, you're a shortcut to get somebody hired there. So thinking about it from a career perspective, I always look at every interview not only as a potential to get hired for a specific job, but possibly as importantly, an opportunity to build a professional connection for the future with the hiring manager, with anyone else that you spoke to, because not only have you impressed them, they thought enough of you to bring you in for an interview. Not only have you demonstrated that you'd be a terrific asset for them, but also because you've responded to their rejection in a positive way and been highly professional, gracious, appreciative, all of those kinds of things, you're going to stand out in their memory. So they're going to become someone who is part now of your professional community, part of your professional network. You may want to drop them a line now and then and just say, here's where I ended up. And I just wanted to stay in touch and tell you how much I appreciated you guys taking the time to interview me, because it really reminded me about why I was so excited to do this kind of work. Or still looking for a job, but let me know if there are any projects that come up with the organization while I'm pursuing other jobs where I could volunteer and just pitch in and help, because I really liked all of you and I think you're a great organization. Creating your career opportunities in many ways is a matter of creating positive connections with people. And even though you've been rejected from a career, doesn't mean, or from a job interview, doesn't mean that it can't still be a good opportunity for you at some point. All right, so those are sort of general points that apply to any interview situation you would be in. But now let's look at academic library interviews versus public library interviews. In an academic library interview, regardless of what job you are applying for, assume you will be asked to demonstrate your work. So assume you will be asked to create a program. Assume you will be asked to work with a student group, to put together a bibliographic instruction exercise and presentation on the new databases, whatever. Just assume that part of the interview will be doing that kind of performance. Assume that it will probably be an all day or almost all day round robin of interviews, including panel interviews. And one of the reasons this is the case is that a big part of being an academic librarian is that you are on 400 different committees, and there is usually a hiring committee and then multiple department heads, and everybody sort of wants to confirm their importance to the organization by meeting and sort of sizing up someone who is applying for a job, even if it's not in their department. So you may find yourself talking to someone and it's not clear to you why you are talking to them, but just assume many academic libraries kind of take this approach. Again, this is a generalization, but don't be surprised if it happens. Also, in an academic library, there are very well-respected status signifiers. And those status signifiers are very important to people who work in academia. Probably less so in the library than on the rest of the campus, but even in the library to some extent. So when you meet people, assume that what they will be respecting from you is respect for their role and position as much as friendliness. Normally in an interview situation, you would you would sort of have a reaction of being friendly. And certainly you do want to be friendly, but you also want to be somewhat deferential and make it clear that you respect the role that they have. Another difference, this is a generalization again, is that in academia, new ideas move, how would I put this, with great deliberation. So you may be assuming that they would be hiring someone who was an innovative thinker and brings in new ideas and really creative and those kinds of things. But in academia, that usually is not considered necessarily a strength. It's a strength when you're the dean of the library or you're the head of a department. But when you are applying as a new professional, they're looking for someone who is going to respect how things are done and be able to do those things well. The last thing is it can take up to a year before that large hiring committee makes a hiring decision. So if you are applying for academic library jobs, by the way, and it is always okay to ask in any interview, do you know when you are planning to have made a decision about a hire? In an academic library, assume that you can ask that question, but they would probably be surprised that you asked it, and that literally it can be a year before you hear back. So if you can, make sure that you're doing other things while you are waiting to hear back about the decision. Also assume if you are interviewed for a job in an academic library that is at a distance from where you are, they may or may not pay for your travel expense to come and do a face-to-face interview. So it's not something you would ask about. If they don't say we're paying your travel expenses, assume that you are paying them. Okay, now let's look at public library interviews. And again, these are generalizations from discussions I have had with public library hiring people. You may be asked to demonstrate your work if the kind of work you do involves projects or outreach. So for example, you might be asked to put on a children's story hour. You might be asked to do a program of some sort, or do an outreach or a marketing initiative, depending on what job you're applying for. So that usually is made clear in the first interview. If they're going to advance you to the next level of interviews, but just assume that's a possibility depending on the job. The interviews are much, much shorter, unless it's a huge, like central library. Assuming that you're going to be going through one or two shorter interviews, maybe with 2 people, possibly 3 people. It's a much less formal setting. If you're in with a hiring manager, people may be wandering in and out, and just smiling, be friendly and say hi and whatever. But the fact that people are wandering in and out does not mean that that interview is not critically important. So don't be put off by that or have a sense that it's not important what you're doing. While you're in an interview, try to get a sense of the culture. And by that, I mean, is this kind of a culture the one that would work for me? Would I be comfortable with this, say, loose, or informal of an organizational environment? Or would I be comfortable with this level of hierarchies, management hierarchies within an organization? Or would I be comfortable working with an organization that has a lot of cross-departmental collaboration? Those are the kinds of questions you want to be getting answered while you're in the interview, so that you can tell not only would I be good for this job, but would this job be good for me? And honestly, there are a lot of times when you're going to look at that and say, not really. And that's a good call to make. That means you know yourself, you know how you work well, and you know how you can contribute at your highest level. The hiring decision usually comes within 4 to 6 weeks. They're looking for someone to step into a role quickly. And so I would assume that you would hear much more quickly than you would with an academic library. One way to think about this is when you're looking at an academic library job, these things are so long-term, and you end up having such a huge investment in your academic library career that it's more like you're getting married. And so that's kind of what both sides of the exchange are looking at. Whereas with a public library, people move around a lot more. And so a hiring manager is looking to make a quick decision, certainly a good decision, but they aren't looking for the perfect candidate. They're looking for the candidate that will work. And so because of that, they're usually making a decision much more quickly. All right.
Kim?
Yes.
We're going to be wrapping things up in about 5-10 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes. This is actually our last slide.
Okay.
Or excuse me, we have 2 more. Okay. So for public
Thank you.
libraries and academic libraries, negotiating a salary is usually in a fairly narrow range, and you can research that before your interview. You don't want to mention salary in the first interview because it's considered gauche, basically. If someone in the first interview says, tell us what salary you want to be able to respond that you didn't know more about it and the compensation approach, which includes paid medical, paid vacation, paid professional development, that sort of thing, and be prepared to describe why your skills would put you in the high end of the range. Okay, what questions should you ask? This is really quick because I want to send you to that URL at the bottom there. On the iSchool website, we have a section on career development, and the section on interviewing has tons and tons of resources, lots of them on questions to ask and questions you'll probably be asked. And then here are my recommended resources for you. And Carrie McKnight at the bottom is the person who can help you with resumes, LinkedIn profiles, mock interviews, cover letters. She is our resource extraordinaire. All right. So, questions. And by the way, if you have questions that we don't get to tonight, send them to me via email and I'll get right back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Kim, for your wonderful presentation. I'm just going to leave this slide up here in case anyone wants to write down Carrie's email address. So if you have questions, you can email the Career Center. And yeah, did anybody have any questions that they wanted to ask quickly?
I have a really simple one. So I'm actually a finalist for my dream job just coming up here, Kim. And am I allowed to take notes while I'm in the interview? Because I have a tendency to only hear the first half of the question. So I feel like if I could take notes while I'm listening to them, I'm more likely to give like a full answer.
I would say yes, Rachel, and I would say, do you mind if I take notes
Okay.
while we're talking? Because it
Just
just
like
makes
preface.
it easier for me to make sure I'm covering all of the points or whatever. But yeah, usually in an interview, whatever you want to do, it's okay as long as you say. It's easier for me to get back to you as effectively as possible. Do you mind if I take notes or whatever? Good luck, Rachel. That's cool.
Thanks.
Is it okay to share personal stories or keep it professional? It's okay to share personal stories. One, if they're positive, and two, if they in some way relate to what you're talking about when you're applying for the job.
Okay, great. That was my question. Thank you.
Great.
We have one more. We'll take one more and then we'll move on. How to handle a situation when you have not worked in a library in the past, but they are asking about previous library experience.
I would say that if that's a job requirement and you clearly have that in your resume and your cover letter, you would not be asked to interview for that job unless they were willing to accept what I would call transferable skills. So you can say, I've not worked in a library, but in this job, what you're looking for is customer service expertise. And I've been I waitressed my way through college. And so I can work with any individual. I can work with groups. I'm very flexible. I can do all of the things that you're asking for. I just haven't done it in a library. And they wouldn't be interviewing you unless that was an acceptable response.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you again for taking the time to come and speak to us. Thank you to all of our attendees. We appreciate you coming this evening. Please be sure to join us for our book circle event coming up. This is the flyer for it. It's on April 24th at 6 p.m. and the email went out. So if you have any more questions, go ahead and email the Career Center. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming to our event today.